I'm Timothy Vigil, and this is Just Another Word podcast, the Word of the Day podcast for storytellers. T is for tertiary. I am never alone wherever I am. The air itself supplies me with a century of love. When I breathe in, I am breathing in the laughter, tears, victories, passions, thoughts, memories, existence, joys, moments, and the hues of the sunlight on many tones of skin. I am breathing in the same air that was exhaled by many before me. And so how can I ever say that I am alone? C. Joy Bell C. In any narrative, we are taught to prioritize. We focus on the primary, the plot, the forward momentum, the what happens next. We focus on the secondary, the character growth, the internal arc, the how they change. And you could argue one of those should be primary over the other, but there is no argument that those are the two main focuses. But today I want to talk about the tertiary, the things that come after. The word tertiary comes from the Latin tertiaris, meaning of the third part or rank. In science or industry, tertiary is often seen as the final stage or a byproduct. But not so in storytelling. In storytelling, tertiary is the depth that exists behind the character and the plot. To be fair, this is my idea and not necessarily one that is literarily ubiquitous. But the tertiary layer is exactly what C. Joy Bell C. describes. It's the air of the story. It's the laughter, the tears, the memories of a century that linger in the background of your scene. It's the world building. It's the things that surround your story. These details might have no direct bearing on whether your hero lives or dies or if they succeed, but they have everything to do with whether the reader believes your world is alive. The challenge with tertiary elements is that they are, by definition, less important. If you spend too much time on them, you stall your plot. But if you ignore them, your world can feel like a sterile cardboard set. It needs to have a balance. The secret to showing tertiary depth without pulling focus is integration, particularly sensory integration. You shouldn't stop the story to give a history lesson on the city. Instead, you need to describe the way the character's boots echo on the centuries-old cracked basalt. You've given the reader a sense of time and history, while the character is still moving toward their primary goal. You're using the senses to smuggle the weight of the past into the action of the present. You are placing the world into your character's actions. In some genres, it's a lot easier and a lot more accepted to have dumps of information. But it's always preferable if you can integrate this into the story and into your characters rather than just dumping information. So how do we populate that third layer, that tertiary section, without cluttering the page? Well, there's three depths here that I will use, three tiers. The first is sensory background, and you could argue that this is just basic sense. But think of a hero arguing with a villain. This is part of your primary plot. You can mention the smell of rain on hot pavement or the hues of sunlight hitting a dusty window. These are tertiary details They don't change the argument, but they might anchor the scene in a reality that feels larger than just two people talking. They also give us a sense of what the character is noticing. If it's a heated argument where the character, your protagonist, is locked in on the antagonist's actions, having them pause to mention the smell of rain might seem odd. If, however, the moment feels surreal to them, having them mention small, strange nuances of the scene can be grounding. The second tier of depth is the lived-in detail, giving your world a history through touch. Instead of an exposition dump, you could describe a doorframe worn smooth by the shoulders of generations. You have suggested that this building is old. Someone has leaned against it so regularly or walked past it so often, nudging against it, that a groove has been worn into it. We get a sense that this place has been lived in, which is so much better than you explaining to us about how this building was built 150 years ago by architects from blah, 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 blah. It suggests that the world existed before the book and will exist after it ends. The third level of depth is thematic resonance, and I think this is the most difficult to get right and the most difficult to integrate. But tertiary depth is often where your motifs can live. If your story is about betrayal, you can compare this to the world, including a tertiary detail about a moth-eaten tapestry in the background. It doesn't drive the plot, but the sensory texture reinforces the feeling of what's going on with the character and what's going on with the plot. Using details of the scene around to emphasize the plot and emphasize what's important can be really powerful. It's also easy to get wrong and can feel very ham-fisted. It takes practice, trial, and error, and likely getting it wrong several times. But if we can get this balance right, thematic resonance is likely going to be the most powerful use of the tertiary layer we have. Now, with all of this that I'm talking about, I do want to caution one thing. The tertiary layer is important. It is the detail. It is the world. It is the movement. And it is really the thing that makes your book worth reading. Yes, the plot and the characters are the things that your audience are going to remember. But the tertiary details are what make the book breathe, what make it live. These are the details that live under the skin. They might go unnoticed a lot of the time, but they are the things that often make your readers keep turning the page. But I would like to say, err on the side of what makes you excited, particularly if you're writing an early draft. Throw in too many sensory details. Over-explain the setting. You can always go back and pull back. Now, if you're editing and you sense that there's too much going on, pull back. Figure out the balance that works for you. Some writers use a very bare-bones sense of the tertiary layer. Their sensory detail, their world building is thin. They rely on the reader's imagination, but it works well with their writing styles. Others throw in tons and tons of detail. And though this has gone more out of style, info dumps in classic science fiction and fantasy were well known. So there's no perfect amount of tertiary detail. It's about getting the balance right so that your prose is interesting and engaging. Ultimately, tertiary is the layer of the extra. It's the subtle, often unnoticed texture, and it turns a story into a world. As a storyteller, your job is to keep the primary engine running and the secondary heart beating. But don't forget to let the world breathe. When you balance these three things correctly, the tertiary depth becomes the reason your readers want to stay in your world long after the plot has been resolved. You have been listening to Just Another Word podcast with your host, Timothy Vigil. For more information, go to timothyvigil.com.